Octavia had been the jewel of the kingdom, graceful, adored, and envied. Her laughter once filled banquet halls, her beauty the muse of poets. Now, that laughter was a memory drowned by silence. She lived alone in a crumbling cottage at the edge of the dark woods, where even the birds feared to sing after dusk. Each morning she woke to the cold breath of the wind seeping through broken walls. Her hands, once soft and adorned with rings of silver, were now scarred from hunting and splitting firewood. Her silk gowns had long turned to rags. Yet despite the ruin, there was still something regal in the way she moved, something the dirt could not erase. Villagers who passed the forest path whispered stories about her. "Beware the woman in the woods," they said. "She killed her husband for gold and was cursed to live alone." Children threw stones at her cottage door and ran, laughing, but Octavia never chased them. She simply stared at the moonlight spilling across her floorboards and whispered to the night, "You know the truth, don't you?" Some nights, when the loneliness clawed too deep, she would sit outside with her bow across her knees, eyes lifted to the glowing moon above the treetops. It was her silent confessor, the only witness that had seen how her world burned. There were nights she could almost hear her husband's voice in the rustle of leaves, smell the faint trace of his scent on the cold wind. But the forest gave no answers. It only reminded her of what she had lost: her home, her name, and her peace. As dawn crept across the woods, Octavia rose from her knees, clutching her bow. Another day to survive, another day to live among ghosts. But beneath her quiet strength, a storm still slept in her heart, one that would awaken when the truth she had buried came crawling back to life. The next morning came quiet and pale. Frost painted the edges of Octavia's window like silver lace. She stood by the dying fire, her arms folded tightly around herself. For a long while, she simply stared into the ashes, lost in thought. Her mind wandered back to a time when her world had not yet fallen apart. The memory came to her like a dream, the scent of cedar, the warmth of a home that once echoed with laughter. Her hands trembled as she touched the small pendant around her neck, the last thing she had of him. The past she tried to bury clawed its way back to life. There was a time when Lady Octavia of House Varon was a name spoken with reverence. The marble corridors of her husband's estate had once carried the music of her laughter. Servants admired her gentleness, nobles envied her grace, and in the middle of that radiant world stood Lord Cedric, her husband, a man of honor, courage, and tenderness. Cedric was the kind of man who would set aside his sword to help a wounded soldier, or pause a royal feast just to ensure every servant had eaten. He ruled his household not with fear, but with fairness. And Octavia, bright and warm as the dawn, had been the heart that kept his world alive. Together, they were inseparable, two souls bound by devotion. At Cedric's right hand stood Eli, his childhood friend and most trusted confidant. The two men had fought together, hunted together, and built their fortunes side by side. To outsiders, Eli was charming, eloquent, and loyal, a man to be admired. But behind his courteous smile lay something darker. From the first moment Eli met Octavia, his heart betrayed him. Her laughter lingered in his thoughts. Her kindness haunted his dreams. He watched the way she touched Cedric's arm when she laughed, the way she looked at her husband as if no one else existed. What began as admiration slowly turned to longing, and longing into an obsession that consumed him. He told himself it was love, but it was hunger, a selfish craving to possess what he could never deserve. At first, Eli buried it behind polite smiles. He brought her gifts, a rare book from the southern markets, flowers that grew only by the Silver River. But Octavia, ever gracious, accepted them with innocent gratitude. She never noticed the way his eyes lingered too long, or how his compliments cut too close. One evening, as the three of them dined together under the soft glow of candlelight, Eli's gaze kept drifting to her. Cedric spoke of trade routes and council meetings, but Eli could barely hear him. All he saw was the gentle curve of Octavia's lips as she sipped her wine. Later that night, when Cedric retired early, Eli found Octavia in the courtyard, watering the night lilies. The moonlight painted her hair silver, her skin almost glowing. He stepped closer, his voice low. "You have a kind heart, my lady. Even the flowers bloom for you." Octavia smiled, wiping her hands. "You flatter me too much, my lord. My husband says those lilies thrive because of the soil, not me. But the soil never smiled at them like you do," he whispered. The words hung heavy in the night air. Octavia froze, realizing the tone beneath his charm. "My lord," she said softly, her voice steady, "I am your friend's wife." He took another step forward. "I know," he murmured, his eyes clouded. "But sometimes I wish he wasn't." Her expression hardened, not out of anger but disappointment. "Don't speak like that again," she said firmly. "As long as my husband lives, my heart belongs to no other." Eli flinched as though she had struck him. His pride, the pride of a man who had always been admired, twisted into fury. He bowed stiffly and walked away, his heart burning with rejection. That night he stared at his reflection and whispered into the darkness, "If her husband lives, she'll never look my way. Then he must not live." The thought, once monstrous, began to feel like justice to his wounded ego. From that moment, a slow and poisonous plan began to take root. Eli started observing Cedric, his routines, his habits, the way he drank from the same goblet each night after supper. He began making quiet alliances in the background, planting seeds of rumor among the servants about Cedric's wealth, about Octavia's ambitions. A few months later, Cedric fell gravely ill. The physicians were baffled. His symptoms came suddenly and worsened quickly. Octavia stayed by his bedside, her tears soaking his hands as she begged the goddess to spare him. Eli stood beside her, feigning grief. On the fourth night, Cedric passed away quietly, whispering her name one last time. Octavia screamed, a sound that tore through the manor and echoed down the corridors like the cry of a dying soul. Eli held her, pretending to console her, but inside he felt a sick satisfaction. Now, she was free. But she didn't turn to him. She didn't weep in his arms. Instead, she locked herself in her chamber for days, mourning the man she loved. When she finally emerged, she wore black, not for a season, but for eternity. When Eli tried to comfort her, she only said, "Do not mistake my grief for loneliness. My heart is buried with my husband." That rejection, gentle yet absolute, broke something in him. His affection curdled into hatred. If he couldn't have her love, he would destroy her life. Chaos swept through the manor. Rumors spread like wildfire. Eli moved with quiet cunning, planting letters he had forged. Letters that spoke of Octavia's greed, her discontent, her supposed affair with a merchant who promised her freedom if her husband died. Her maids were bribed or threatened to testify against her. By dawn, the perfect illusion of guilt had been woven. During the council trial, the chamber was thick with silence and judgment. Octavia stood before them, pale and trembling in her widow's gown. "My lords, please," she pleaded. "Someone has framed me. My husband was everything to me." But Eli's performance was flawless. He knelt before the council, tears streaking his face as he held a piece of parchment, one of the forged letters. "I loved him like a brother," he choked. "He trusted her with his life, and she betrayed him for gold." The murmurs in the hall turned venomous. Words like murderer and traitor filled the air. The council members exchanged grim looks. No one questioned the credibility of Lord Eli, the loyal friend who had tried to warn them too late. When the Queen Mother Beatrix entered the hall, her golden robe brushed the floor like waves of judgment. Her face was a mask of sorrow and disgust. "Lady Octavia of House Varon," she declared coldly, "for the crime of murdering your husband, Lord Cedric, you are hereby stripped of all titles, lands, and honor. You are banished from this kingdom until death claims you." Octavia's knees buckled. "Your Majesty, I am innocent. Please, look into my eyes. I loved him." But her words met stone hearts. The guards seized her by the arms, dragging her toward the gates as the onlookers gathered. Some wept, others spat. The people who once bowed before her now hurled stones, curses, and rotten food. Her silk gown was torn. Blood streaked her cheek. She looked back one last time, toward the manor where she and Cedric once watched sunsets together. And there, standing on the balcony, was Eli. Their eyes met for a brief, soul-crushing second. His expression was unreadable, neither grief nor remorse, just quiet triumph. As the gates shut behind her, Octavia's sobs faded into the wind. Her world had ended that day. She had lost her husband, her honor, and her place in the world, all because of the one man her husband had called brother. The forest had long since accepted her as one of its own. Its silence, its thorns, its shifting shadows. All were her companions now. Octavia's once soft hands had become rough from years of cutting wood, washing her own linen in the icy stream, and gathering herbs she barely knew the names of. The grand hallways of marble and gold that once echoed her laughter were now replaced by the creaking of her cottage walls and the hoot of distant owls. It had been months since anyone had seen her. The villagers at the foot of the hill spoke her name only in whispers. None dared approach the ruined cottage, for fear that the murderer of Lord Cedric would kill them next. But Octavia had no hate to give, only grief. Every dawn she sat by the cracked window and watched the mist roll across the woods like a ghostly tide. The faint light that broke through the trees reminded her of mornings she once shared with Cedric, his laughter as he teased her about sleeping too long, the warmth of his hand on hers as they broke bread together. Those memories cut deeper than any blade, yet she clung to them like lifelines in a sea of sorrow. She had learned to survive on roots, berries, and the occasional rabbit snared in her traps. The forest was merciless, but she was determined. She built her fire with care, guarded her cottage like a wounded bird, and spoke only to the moon. "If you can hear me," she would whisper each night, her eyes wet, "let him rest. Let his soul find peace, even if mine never does." The dawn broke quietly over the kingdom, painting the palace roofs with a wash of gold. Inside the grand courtyard, Queen Mother Beatrix stood beside her silver chariot, wrapped in a deep blue cloak embroidered with moons. Her heart was heavy. For weeks, the nightmares had returned, the same dream of a crying woman beneath a bleeding moon. She believed the goddess was speaking to her again. "I will go to the temple," she told her maid. "Perhaps the moon will show me what these dreams mean." The guards tried to persuade her to take a larger escort, but Beatrix refused. "It is sacred ground. No harm will come to me under the moon's watch." But fate had other plans. The journey began peacefully. The woods that surrounded the temple were ancient and full of quiet whispers. The horses moved steadily along the narrow path, their hooves soft against the mossy ground. Beatrix breathed in the scent of pine and damp earth. For the first time in days, her heart began to settle. Then, the wind changed. It came as a faint rustle first, then a growl. One of the guards halted, raising his hand. "My queen," he warned, his voice low. "Something moves in the trees." Before another word could be spoken, the woods erupted. Dark shapes leapt from the shadows. Wolves, massive and wild, their eyes glowing with crimson fury. The air filled with snarls and the clang of steel as the guards shifted into their wolf forms, meeting the attackers head-on. Beatrix watched in horror as the battle turned bloody. Her soldiers fought bravely, but the rogues were too many. One by one, her protectors fell, their howls silenced under the moonlight that filtered through the trees. A claw struck her shoulder. Pain ripped through her body. She screamed, stumbling backward as her own wolf spirit stirred within her. With a shuddering breath, she shifted, bones twisting, fur bursting forth. A majestic silver wolf replaced her form. Her instincts screamed run. She darted through the forest, her silver fur streaked with blood. The cries of her dying guards echoed behind her. Twigs snapped beneath her paws, the scent of blood filled her nostrils. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to survive. The rogues followed her trail. She could hear them, snarling, relentless. Her vision blurred, every step burned. The forest seemed endless, cruelly spinning her in circles until she no longer knew north from south. And then, silence. The rogue stopped following. Perhaps they had lost her scent. Perhaps the moon herself had hidden her beneath her silver gaze. Beatrix stumbled into a clearing, panting heavily. Her strength was gone. She shifted back into her human form, her gown torn, her body shaking from blood loss. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of smoke. Wood smoke, faint, but near. Someone lives here, she thought weakly. She tried to move toward it. Her vision swam. The world tilted. She reached out, her fingers brushing the wet grass as she collapsed. Her last sight before the darkness took her was a small cottage a few feet away. A humble thing with smoke curling from its chimney and the soft light of a fire glowing through its window. Octavia had just returned from the forest, a bough slung over her shoulder and a handful of berries in her palm. She stopped when she saw the shape on the ground. A frail, wounded woman lying near her fence, blood glistening on her torn gown. Her heart tightened. She dropped everything and ran to her side. Moon above. Octavia gasped, kneeling. The woman's pulse was weak, her lips pale. Octavia tore a strip from her own dress and pressed it against the bleeding wound. "Stay with me, please. You're safe now." She didn't know who the stranger was, only that she couldn't leave her there to die. With all the strength she had, Octavia lifted the unconscious woman and carried her inside the cottage. She laid the woman gently by the hearth. The stranger's breathing was shallow, her skin pale as moonlight. Her silver hair was tangled and wet with blood. "Who did this to you?" Octavia whispered, her voice shaking, but there was no answer, only a faint, ragged breath. Octavia sprang into action. She fetched a bowl of warm water and tore clean strips from her own sheets. Her hands shook as she cleaned the gashes across the woman's shoulder and arm. One wound looked deep, too deep, but Octavia refused to lose her. "Stay with me," she murmured, pressing a damp cloth against the wound. "You'll be fine. Just breathe." Outside, the night wind howled, carrying the deep growl of the black wolf. It circled the cottage again, its glowing eyes flashing through the darkness. But Octavia ignored it for once. Tonight someone needed her more than her fears did. Hours passed. The candles burned low and Octavia's arms ached. She mixed herbs she had gathered in the forest, rosemary for the fever, silverleaf for pain, and boiled them in a clay pot. The scent filled the small room, soft and soothing. Carefully, she lifted the woman's head and pressed the potion to her lips. "Drink," Octavia whispered. "Please drink." A weak moan escaped the woman's mouth, but she swallowed. Relief flooded Octavia's chest. She smiled faintly and brushed the woman's damp hair from her face. "You'll make it," she said softly. "I promise you'll make it." By dawn, the stranger's breathing steadied. Octavia, exhausted, slumped beside the fire. She hadn't slept all night. Her eyelids felt heavy, but her heart was light. For the first time in years, her cottage wasn't silent. When morning broke, a faint voice stirred her from half-sleep. "Where am I?" Octavia blinked, startled. The old woman's eyes were open, gray and deep like storm clouds. Confusion lingered in them, but there was life too. "You're safe," Octavia said gently, leaning closer. "You were hurt. I found you outside my door." The woman tried to sit up but winced, pressing her side. Octavia helped her rest back on the pillow. "Don't move too much," she warned. "You lost a lot of blood. You're lucky the goddess spared you." The woman's gaze drifted around the small cottage, the wooden walls, the herbs hanging from the ceiling, the little fire crackling near her feet. It was all so humble, so quiet. "You live here alone?" she asked softly. Octavia nodded. For a long time now. Something in her tone made the woman's heart ache. She studied the young face before her, tired eyes, worn hands, but a beauty that had not faded even under hardship. There was a quiet strength in her, the kind born of pain. "Why?" the old woman asked. "Why live in such solitude?" Octavia smiled sadly and turned away, Because the world left me no choice. The woman fell silent, sensing a depth of sorrow she did not yet understand. Octavia stood and stirred the pot hanging over the fire. You should eat, she said. You need strength. She poured warm broth into a wooden bowl and held it out. It's not much, but it will help. The old woman accepted it with trembling hands. The first sip brought tears to her eyes, not because of the taste, but because someone had cared enough to feed her. I owe you my life, she murmured. Octavia shook her head. No one owes kindness. The world would be better if we gave it freely. They spoke little after that. The silence between them was not heavy. It was gentle, like two weary souls resting in each other's quiet company. As days passed, Beatrix's wounds began to heal. Each morning, Octavia changed her bandages, fetched water, and gathered herbs. She spoke softly about the forest, the moon, and the creatures that passed her door. The old woman listened, her curiosity deepening. One evening, when the fire burned low and the scent of pine drifted through the cracks of the old cottage, the woman finally asked, "What is your name, my dear?" "Octavia," she said simply. "Octavia," Beatrix repeated softly, as though testing the sound. "That's a beautiful name." "Thank you," Octavia said. "And you? May I know the name of the woman I almost lost to death?" Beatrix hesitated. For a moment, she almost told the truth. But then she remembered the weight of her crown, the danger in revealing who she truly was. "My name is Bianca," she lied gently. "I was on my way to the temple when I was attacked." Octavia nodded. "Then perhaps the goddess brought you here for a reason." By the 7th morning, Queen Mother Beatrix could stand. Her wounds had closed into pale scars, her strength slowly returning under Octavia's gentle care. The days had been kind, filled with quiet conversations, soft laughter, and the sound of wind sweeping through the forest leaves. Yet something still stirred in Beatrix's chest. A curiosity, a longing to know the woman who had saved her life. That evening, when the fire crackled and the forest hummed beyond the cottage walls, Beatrix finally asked, "Octavia, may I know your story?" Octavia, who had been grinding herbs by the hearth, froze. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft rasp of the pestle against the bowl. She didn't turn. "My story," she repeated softly, almost to herself. "It's not a pleasant one." Beatrix sat straighter. "I still want to hear it, if you don't mind." Octavia looked into the fire. Its light painted gold across her face, revealing both beauty and sorrow, two things time had not managed to steal. "I was once Lady Octavia Varon," she began, her voice distant. "Wife of Lord Cedric Varon of the Eastern Court. He was a noble man, kind, patient, and just. We had a quiet life, filled with peace." Beatrix's chest tightened at the name. Varon. She knew that name too well. It had echoed through the palace halls the year a lord was found dead and his wife accused of murder. Octavia continued, unaware of the shadow creeping over Beatrix's face. "Cedric had a friend," she said bitterly. "Eli. The court praised him as loyal and wise, but behind his smiles he hid something darker. He desired me, and he made his desire known even while my husband yet lived." Beatrix's fingers curled in her lap. "I told him no," Octavia whispered. "I told him I would never betray my husband. He laughed and said I would come to him when my husband was gone." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "I did not understand what he meant, not until it was too late." The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. One night, Cedric collapsed after drinking from his cup. The guards said they found him poisoned. Eli was the first to comfort me, the first to whisper that perhaps my husband had enemies. But days later, after he tried to have his way with me and failed, he told the court I had killed Cedric for his fortune, that he himself had seen me poison the wine. Her voice trembled. They believed him. The Queen Mother, the council, everyone. He bribed and threatened my servants to testify against me. No one defended. No one asked for mercy. Beatrix's eyes filled with tears she didn't dare let fall. The memory came rushing back. Eli's calm voice before the council, his tears, his convincing grief. She had believed him. She had signed the judgment herself, stamping her seal on Octavia's ruin. I begged for a fair trial, Octavia continued, her voice thick. I swore on my husband's grave that I was innocent, but the more I pleaded, the more they saw guilt. They stripped my name, my lands, my jewels. I remember standing before them in chains as the Queen Mother read the decree. Beatrix's breath caught in her throat. Octavia's gaze drifted toward the window where the moon hung low. That night, they led me out of the gates. The people threw stones, shouting murderer and cursed widow. I walked until I reached these woods. I have lived here ever since. Silence filled the cottage. The fire burned low, its light trembling across the walls. Beatrix's heart pounded. She wanted to speak, to confess who she truly was, but her voice failed her. Guilt wrapped around her like chains. Did no one ever come to your aid? Beatrix asked at last, though she already knew the answer. No one, Octavia said quietly. Eli made sure of that. He comes here often in his wolf form, reminding me that he owns my fear. Beatrix's lips parted in shock. He still haunts you? Yes, Octavia said, her voice trembling with exhaustion. I see his eyes at night, I hear his growl. He never lets me forget that he won, but I still pray for my husband's soul and for justice, even if it comes long after I'm gone. Beatrix's heart broke. The fire crackled softly as tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. Octavia noticed. Bianca? She asked softly. Are you unwell? Beatrix wiped her tears quickly, forcing a smile. It's nothing, my dear. Your story, it's heavy. It touches the soul. No woman deserves such cruelty. Octavia gave a faint nod. It no longer hurts as it once did. Pain dulls when one has no choice but to live with it. Beatrix's chest tightened again. She was innocent, she thought in anguish. I condemned her with my own hand. That night, when Octavia had gone to rest, Beatrix remained awake before the dying fire. She stared at the ashes, hearing echoes of her own voice years ago, stern, cold, powerful, reading the sentence that had destroyed this woman's life. How blind I was, she whispered. How cruelly blind. She thought of Eli's face at the trial, his practiced sorrow, his trembling voice, his false loyalty. How could she not have seen the deceit? Tears streamed down her face as the truth settled in her soul. The moon had not sent her to this woman by chance. She had been led here, to face her sin, to right a wrong that had haunted the heavens themselves. The night had never been so heavy. Clouds rolled across the silver moon, dimming its light until only a ghostly shimmer filtered through the tall trees surrounding Octavia's cottage. Inside, the fire burned low, its embers breathing warmth into the frail silence. Beatrix lay awake on the straw bed Octavia had made for her, unable to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, Octavia's story replayed in her mind, each word a dagger of guilt. Octavia, unaware of the storm brewing in her guest's heart, sat quietly by the hearth. Her slender fingers moved gently over a piece of cloth she was mending, though her eyes were far away. Her face, still elegant despite the wear of suffering, was softened by the fire's glow. Beatrix watched her for a long while, trying to reconcile this humble woman with the so-called murderer she had condemned years ago. How have you survived here all alone? Beatrix finally whispered, her voice trembling. Octavia lifted her head slowly, a faint, sad smile curving her lips. I suppose because I had to, she murmured. When the world turns away from you, you learn to live with what's left. Beatrix turned her gaze to the flickering fire. And Eli? She asked carefully. Octavia's hand stilled. The cloth slipped from her lap. He comes every night, she said quietly, growling, circling the cottage. Her eyes lifted toward the window where darkness pressed against the glass like a living thing. He cannot have me, yet he will not let me rest, she said. Beatrix shivered, drawing her shawl closer. The air seemed to grow colder with every word. Outside, as if summoned by their talk, a deep growl rumbled through the forest. The old woman's heart jolted. The growl became a snarl, closer now, heavy paws crushing leaves, circling the cottage. Octavia stood, moving to the window with a calm that startled Beatrix. The light from the fire painted her silhouette in golden shadow as she whispered, "He's here." Beatrix rose slowly, fear tightening her chest. She joined Octavia at the window, and together they peered into the darkness. Two burning eyes glared back at them through the gloom, eyes too intelligent, too cruel. The wolf's black fur glistened with dew. Its fangs gleamed as it growled low and guttural, a sound that seemed to shake the earth. Then, as suddenly as it came, it vanished into the trees. Beatrix turned to Octavia, her face pale and shaken. "You have endured this every night?" Octavia nodded faintly. "For years." Beatrix's heart broke for her. She reached out, taking Octavia's hand gently. "You have suffered too long," she said in a trembling voice. "No soul should bear such torment. The wicked thrive while the good are cast aside. It is not the way of the goddess." Octavia smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "I used to think the same, but I've learned to live with silence. It hurts less than false hope." Beatrix looked at her then, really looked, and something in her heart changed. In Octavia's quiet dignity, she saw what true nobility meant. Not jewels, not crowns, not power, but grace in the face of ruin. She swallowed hard, a silent vow forming in her chest. This cannot remain hidden. The world must know the truth. "Octavia," she said softly, "you deserve justice. What was stolen from you must be returned. One day the truth will rise again like dawn after the longest night." Octavia's eyes shimmered in the firelight. "I've stopped hoping for such things," she murmured. "Then let me hope for you," Beatrix said quietly, her tone fierce despite her age. "I will see that justice is done. I swear it." Octavia looked at her in surprise, moved by the strength in the old woman's words. "You speak as though you have the power to change things." Beatrix smiled sadly. "Perhaps I do. Or perhaps I will find someone who does." She did not reveal who she truly was. Instead, she reached out and took Octavia's hand, her grip warm and trembling. "You have a kind heart," she whispered, "and the moon does not turn away from the kind. The goddess sees all, even what men hide." That night, long after Octavia had fallen asleep, Beatrix sat awake by the dying fire. The flames cast flickers of light on her face as she whispered into the silence. "By the moon's light, I swear it. I will make the truth known. I will right this wrong." The first rays of dawn crept into the small cottage, spilling gently across the wooden floor and touching the edges of the worn blanket where Beatrix sat. The fire had burned to embers, its soft orange glow flickering like a fading heartbeat. Birds began to sing in the distant woods, their songs weaving through the mist that still clung to the morning air. Beatrix knew it was time to leave. Her wounds had healed enough for travel. More than that, her heart carried a different weight now. A secret, a promise, and a guilt she could no longer bury beneath her crown. Octavia stood near the door, her hands clasped before her gown, watching the older woman gather her cloak. "You're leaving?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with worry. Beatrix nodded, fastening the silver brooch at her shoulder. "I must. There are things that need to be set right," she said gently. Octavia stepped closer. "The woods are dangerous. Let me at least walk you to the ridge." Beatrix smiled faintly. "No, child. The moon will watch my path." She reached out and took Octavia's hands in hers. "You have done more for me than anyone ever has. You saved my life, yet you do not ask for anything." Octavia gave a small, humble shrug. One doesn't need a reason to show kindness. It was the right thing to do. Beatrix's eyes softened, and for a long moment she simply studied the woman before her. The tired lines beneath her eyes, the quiet dignity in her posture, the light of compassion that refused to die despite everything she'd endured. There was something pure about her presence, something the world had not managed to stain. "I meant what I said last night," Beatrix whispered. "Things will be different." Octavia smiled faintly, though there was sadness behind it. "I've stopped waiting for change. But your words are enough. They make the day a little warmer." Beatrix's throat tightened. "Hold on to that warmth," she said softly. "Because soon, the night will end." With that, Beatrix turned and stepped into the misty morning. The forest swallowed her figure slowly until she was gone, leaving Octavia standing in the doorway with tears glimmering in her eyes. She watched until the last rustle of Beatrix's cloak vanished beyond the trees. The silence returned heavy and familiar. Octavia closed the door, leaning against it as a long sigh escaped her lips. Her life would return to its quiet rhythm: firewood, hunting, loneliness. But for the first time in years, she carried something fragile yet alive in her heart: hope. The palace was a world apart. Its marble floors gleamed beneath the sunlight, banners fluttered proudly above the grand hall, and the scent of polished wood and burning incense filled the air. Yet, despite its beauty, there was a coldness about it, a quiet distance that seemed to mirror the heart of its ruler. Alpha King Orion stood at the edge of the royal balcony, his sharp gaze sweeping across the distant forests that stretched beyond the city walls. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanding even in silence. The crown upon his head seemed both a symbol of power and a chain of duty. He had been king for 5 years now, a ruler feared and respected, but he was also a man who had long closed his heart to love. When the heavy doors opened behind him, Orion did not turn immediately. "Mother," he said flatly, "you return." Beatrix's soft steps approached. "And you seem to have missed me despite the weight you carry," she countered gently. A faint smirk crossed his lips. "You forget, Mother. The weight is my crown. It never leaves." She sighed, walking beside him. For a while they stood together in silence, looking out over the kingdom. The morning wind tugged at her veil, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Finally, Beatrix spoke. "I met someone." That caught his attention. Orion turned slightly, one brow raised. "Someone?" "Yes," she said quietly. "A woman, in the forest. She saved my life." Orion frowned. "You went to the temple, did you not? How did a woman in the forest save the Queen Mother?" Beatrix hesitated. "I was attacked by rogues on my way there. My escort fell. I would not be standing here if not for her kindness." Orion's eyes softened slightly, though his voice remained firm. "And who is she?" Beatrix hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "She is an outcast, a widow who lives at the kingdom's edge. She has nothing, yet she gave everything she had to help a stranger." Orion's jaw tightened. "An outcast?" "Yes, but not one of shame," Beatrix continued. "Her name is Octavia." The name hung between them like a soft bell chime. Orion's eyes darkened slightly. "Octavia." He searched his memory, then frowned. Was that not the woman accused of murdering her husband, the noble Lord Cedric? Beatrix's heart ached. "Yes," she said quietly. "But not everything told in court is true." He turned away, his expression unreadable. "Mother, you must not let pity cloud your judgment. The council found her guilty. The kingdom's laws were deceived," Beatrix interrupted firmly. He blinked, surprised by the strength in her voice. "I looked into that woman's eyes, Orion," she continued. "I saw truth there. Sorrow, yes, but not guilt. She has been wronged." The king exhaled slowly, his gaze returning to the horizon. "Even if you are right, it is not our concern. The past is gone." Beatrix studied him carefully. "You speak as though you have no heart left, my son." He gave a humorless laugh. "Perhaps I don't. Hearts are fragile things, easily broken. I have seen too many faces masked with love, only to find greed beneath. Her eyes softened with sorrow. Is that what you truly believe? That love is nothing but a disguise? Orion's voice dropped low, almost bitter. Love is a luxury the powerful cannot afford. Women seek power, not love. Affection fades, ambition does not. Beatrix turned away, her chest tightening. The man before her was not the bright-eyed boy she once raised. He was the product of betrayal, power, and loss. Not all women are driven by greed, Orion, she said quietly. Some still carry goodness within them. I have seen it. I have felt it. He looked at her then, his brow furrowed. You speak of this Octavia as though she were a saint. Beatrix smiled faintly. Not a saint. Just a woman who chose kindness even when the world gave her every reason to hate. Orion turned his gaze away, but her words lingered. She lives in solitude, Beatrix went on softly. And yet she opened her door to a dying stranger. She gave me warmth when she had little, and mercy when she had nothing to gain. If there is any goodness left in this world, Orion, it lives in her. The king was silent for a long moment. The sunlight caught the edge of his crown, glinting like fire in his dark hair. At last he said, Even if what you say is true, I cannot act on pity. I am king, not a redeemer. Beatrix smiled knowingly. No, but perhaps the moon will show you that some hearts are still worth believing in. He frowned. What are you suggesting? Nothing, she said softly. Only that sometimes to see truth, one must look with different eyes. Orion gave a short, dismissive exhale, but something in her tone stirred him, a faint echo of curiosity, or perhaps longing he thought long dead. Beatrix watched him closely, then turned toward the door. Do not harden your heart so much, my son, she murmured. For one day, even kings will need to be saved, not by power, but by love. And as she left the chamber, Orion stood alone, his thoughts troubled. He told himself it was nonsense, a story of pity from a mother's bleeding heart. But deep within, beneath the armor of his pride, a quiet thought began to whisper. Who is this woman that moved my mother so deeply? He turned back to the balcony, his eyes fixed on the distant woods where the mist still hung heavy. Somewhere out there, far from the marble and gold of his palace, a forgotten woman was waiting. And though he did not yet know it, her kindness would soon shatter the walls around his heart and change the fate of his kingdom forever. The morning sun spilled softly over the forest, its golden rays gliding across damp leaves and glistening streams. Birds sang in gentle harmony, as if to bless the new day. But within the palace, Alpha King Orion sat upon his throne in silence, his mother's words echoing through his mind like a restless whisper. She is not what the world painted her to be, Beatrix had said. There is a goodness in her eyes that no lies can bury. Those words refused to leave him. For nights he could not sleep, haunted not by war nor betrayal, but by the image of a woman he had never seen. A widow who had lost everything, yet still found strength to help a stranger. Finally, one cold morning, he gave in to his curiosity. He cast aside his royal garments, traded his crown for a hooded cloak, and slipped away from the palace unnoticed. He rode alone through the forest, following the path his mother had described. He wanted no guards, no attention, no formality, only truth. Hours passed before the forest thickened, shadows crawling beneath the trees. Wolves howled in the distance, their cries carried by the wind. His horse grew uneasy, snorting as it sensed movement among the bushes. Orion calmed the beast with a soft stroke, then dismounted, choosing to continue on foot. But fate had its own plans. A sudden storm rolled over the hills, dark clouds swallowing the sun. Rain poured heavily, drenching him in seconds. His cloak clung to his shoulders, and the muddy path became slippery underfoot. He pressed on, determined to find the cottage his mother spoke of, though he had no idea what awaited him. By the time he stumbled upon the small clearing, he was trembling from cold and exhaustion. He hesitated, pride warring with need. Never had the king begged for anything, not food, not warmth, not mercy. But hunger and fatigue had no respect for crowns. At last he knocked. The door creaked open, revealing a woman wrapped in a faded shawl. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of him, a stranger drenched and shivering on her doorstep. "Please," he said quietly, lowering his gaze. "I mean no harm. I only seek shelter for the night." Her expression softened. "Come in before the rain steals your strength." He entered, dripping water onto the wooden floor. The warmth inside hit him like a blessing. The air smelled of herbs, firewood, and freshly baked bread. She moved gracefully, though her clothes were worn, her hands gentle as she offered him a seat near the fire. "You look half dead," she murmured, smiling faintly. "Sit, traveler. You'll catch your death out there." He obeyed, his heart thudding strangely. There was something about her voice, soft yet steady, fragile yet strong, that pulled him in. As she prepared a bowl of stew, he found his eyes tracing the lines of her face. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with vanity. Her beauty was quiet, like a song sung in secret. There was wisdom in her eyes and sadness too, the kind that came from a heart that had known pain and survived it. She placed the bowl before him, and the steam rose like a spirit of warmth. "Eat," she said simply. He took a spoonful. The taste was simple but rich, seasoned with care. He looked up at her, surprised. "This is good," he admitted. She smiled. "It's nothing special." "Even so," he said softly, "you shared it with a stranger." Her gaze flickered toward the window where the rain battered against the glass. "We're all strangers until kindness makes us otherwise," she replied. Something in him stirred at that. Her words carried the weight of truth, gentle but powerful. He felt humbled, as if her small cottage were holier than his palace hall. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound being the crackle of the fire and the distant rumble of thunder. Finally, he spoke again. "You live here alone?" "Yes," she said. "The world beyond these woods has no place for me." "Why?" he asked, though he already knew. She hesitated, her eyes lowering. "People believe what they're told. Sometimes no truth can shout louder than a lie." Her words pierced him. The pain in her voice was hidden, but he heard it. He remembered the rumors, the murderess, the witch, the outcast widow. He now saw the truth his mother had spoken of. "You've known sorrow," he said softly. She chuckled sadly. "Haven't we all?" He wanted to tell her who he was, that he had the power to change her fate, that he could bring light back into her world. But something in him, perhaps shame, perhaps awe, kept him silent. He wanted her to treat him as a man, not a king. Night fell. She gave him a blanket and a space near the fire. "Rest," she said. "The storm will pass." As he lay there, pretending to sleep, he watched her quietly as she mended an old shawl by candlelight. Her fingers moved with patience, her face calm, and for the first time in years, Orion felt peace, not the kind born from conquest, but from something softer, something pure. By dawn, the storm had cleared and the forest shimmered with dew, but something had changed within the king. The armor around his heart had cracked, and through that crack, light began to pour. He no longer saw an outcast. He saw a woman who had given everything, yet still found room to care. And in that moment the mighty Alpha King understood something he had forgotten long ago. Kindness was not weakness. It was the truest form of strength. And though he left her cottage that morning as quietly as he had come, a vow had already been born within him. He would return, not as a beggar, not as a king, but as a man who had finally found something worth fighting for again. The days slipped into weeks, like quiet whispers carried by the forest wind. The rains had passed and sunlight began to dapple through the trees once more. In those still, gentle mornings, the world seemed softer, kinder, and in that softness, something new began to bloom. Orion came often now, always in his traveler's disguise, his cloak worn, his boots muddied, and his tone humble. He told Octavia that he was a wanderer with no home, a man who sought peace where the noise of the world could not reach. She never questioned him deeply. Perhaps she saw a reflection of her own solitude in him. At first, he came with excuses: a gift of wild herbs, a bundle of wood, a rabbit from the hunt. Then, his visits became wordless, natural. Sometimes he would arrive just as she was fetching water or tending to her small garden, and she would smile faintly, as if she had been expecting him all along. Their companionship grew quietly, like ivy climbing over old stone. Slow, steady, unstoppable. One afternoon, they sat outside beneath the shade of a wide tree. Octavia was weaving a small basket while Orion sharpened a stick into a fishing spear. The air was cool, the wind carrying the faint scent of pine and rain-washed earth. "Tell me," she said softly, her fingers still busy. "Where did you live before you began wandering?" He hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Far from here," he said. "A place where I once believed I had everything: power, loyalty, respect. But I discovered they meant little when the heart is empty." She looked up, her brow slightly furrowed. "Then you left it all behind?" "I had to," he said quietly. The walls began to feel like a prison. Everyone wanted something, except truth. Her eyes softened with understanding. "You sound like someone who has been betrayed." He smiled bitterly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I simply expected too much of people." She stopped weaving for a moment, gazing at the forest as if seeing her own reflection in his words. "People disappoint, but not everyone does." Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, something warm, cautious, yet undeniable. That evening, Octavia cooked a meal from the herbs and wild roots he had brought. As they ate by the fire, Orion found himself laughing, real laughter, deep and unguarded. It startled him at first. It had been years since laughter felt natural. Octavia's own laughter joined his, light and melodic, filling the small cottage with life it hadn't known in years. For her, too, something had changed. She had grown so used to silence, to solitude, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, truly seen. This stranger had become her companion, her friend, her reason to look forward to each dawn. He was gentle. He never pried into her wounds or questioned the pain that sometimes flickered across her face when the fire dimmed. Instead, he listened to her stories of her husband, of her art, of the things she missed. He admired the way she spoke of kindness as if it were a treasure, not a weakness. And in return, she found herself drawn to his silence, the calm in his voice, the sadness in his eyes. There was a nobility in the way he carried himself, though he never boasted nor commanded. He spoke like someone used to giving orders, yet he treated her words with reverence as if each one mattered. Sometimes they worked together, repairing the roof, chopping firewood, fetching water from the stream. On one of those days, as they lifted a heavy log together, their hands brushed. It was a fleeting touch, but both froze. Octavia's heart fluttered wildly, her cheeks flushing with warmth. Orion felt it too, a sudden rush, raw and disarming. He drew his hand back slowly, his throat tightening. "Forgive me," he murmured. "There's nothing to forgive," she whispered. But her voice trembled ever so slightly. From that day, something delicate began to stir between them, a quiet affection, hesitant but pure. They began to share stories from their hearts. Orion spoke of the loneliness that comes with power, though he never mentioned he was a king. Octavia spoke of the loneliness that comes with being hated unjustly. Together, they found a strange comfort in their brokenness. Octavia found herself dreaming again, not of revenge or lost honor, but of laughter, of company, of warmth. She would wake in the mornings, humming softly, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The black wolf's howls no longer haunted her as they once did. Instead, she had hope, a fragile thing, but precious. Orion, too, had changed. When he returned to the palace, his guards noticed it, the calm in his tone, the gentleness in his decisions. His mother saw it most of all and smiled quietly, saying nothing. She had her suspicions, but chose not to speak them aloud. Each time he left the palace for solitude, he found himself back in that small cottage, drawn by the warmth he couldn't find anywhere else. Days turned to weeks. The once quiet widow began to smile more often. The once broken king began to heal. And beneath the vast watchful moon, two souls, one cloaked in sorrow, the other in disguise, found in each other something they had both thought lost forever: the warmth of forgotten joy. The fire burned softly that evening, its glow dancing across the humble walls of the cottage. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, gentle and familiar. The black wolf had not been seen for many nights now. Even the woods seemed to rest in peace. Octavia sat by the hearth, her fingers weaving a new blanket from wool she had gathered and dyed herself. Orion, still in his traveler's guise, sat near her, sharpening a wooden carving knife, pretending to focus, though his heart was elsewhere. He had been restless all day. Each time he looked at her, her calm expression, her quiet strength, her unshaken grace despite her past, he felt the truth pressing harder against his chest. The lie he had built to be near her had begun to burn. He wanted to tell her. He needed to tell her. But fear of losing what they had held him back. That night, unable to bear the silence any longer, he broke it. "Octavia," he said softly. She looked up, smiling faintly. "If," he began, pretending casual curiosity, "if the Alpha King himself stood before you and asked for your hand, what would you do?" Octavia laughed gently, the sound warm and pure. "The Alpha King? I would say no." Orion raised a brow, amused and a little wounded. "No?" She nodded with a playful sparkle in her eyes. "Because a king's heart belongs to his kingdom, not to love. He would see me as a burden, not a blessing." Her words pierced him, though she meant no harm. He swallowed, his voice quieter now. What if I were the king, and I loved you still?" The question lingered in the air like a fragile note. The flames crackled softly between them. Octavia's hand stilled, her gaze rising to meet his. There was a softness in her expression, a tenderness that reached past the disguise and straight into the man's soul. She rose slowly and moved to where he sat. Kneeling beside him, she cupped his face gently, her thumb brushing against the faint stubble on his cheek. "Then," she whispered, "I would still choose you, because I knew your heart before the crown." Her words shattered something inside him, something proud, guarded, cold. He had heard countless voices of flattery and lies in his life. But this was truth, raw and simple. He closed his eyes, leaning slightly into her touch, his heart trembling under the weight of her sincerity. When he opened them again, they were no longer the eyes of a traveler. They carried the depth of a king, the strength of authority, and the vulnerability of a man in love. He reached for her hand, holding it as though it anchored him. "Octavia," he said, his voice trembling, "there is something I must tell you, and I can no longer keep it hidden." She blinked, sensing the gravity in his tone. "What is it?" He rose to his feet, stepping back as if giving her space to breathe. His heart pounded fiercely as he drew off his worn cloak and straightened his posture. Even in the dim firelight, a new presence surrounded him, a quiet power, commanding and regal. "I am not a traveler," he said slowly. "I am Orion, Alpha King of the Western Realms." The words fell like thunder in the silence. Octavia froze. The color drained from her face. For a moment the fire crackled too loudly, mocking the stillness that followed. Her lips parted in disbelief. No, that's not possible." She gave a nervous laugh, shaking her head. "You're joking, aren't you? That's cruel, even for jest." He stepped closer, his expression full of pain and truth. "I wish it were a jest, but it's the truth, Octavia. The man you nursed, the one you shared your bread with, is your king." She stumbled back, her hands trembling. Her mind raced through every moment, the simplicity in his words, his grace, the quiet authority she sometimes caught glimpses of. It all made sense now. Her eyes filled with tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Why deceive me?" He looked down, shame shadowing his face. "Because I needed to see you without the crown, to know if the kindness my mother spoke of was real. She told me of the woman who saved her life in the woods, the widow she owed everything to. I had to see you for myself. I had to know who you were." Octavia pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "Your mother?" "Yes," Orion said softly. "The old woman you found by your doorstep. That was my mother, Queen Mother Beatrix. You saved her life, Octavia. She spoke of your grace, your faith, your courage. She said she met a woman pure enough to shame the stars." Octavia's breath caught. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. "All this time," she whispered. "You knew?" He nodded slowly. "I knew." Her eyes filled with tears, confusion and disbelief swirling within them. She turned away, torn between awe and anger, humility and heartbreak. "You're the Alpha King, and yet you sat at my table like a beggar, ate my food, slept beside my fire." "I did," he said quietly, "because I wanted to understand the woman the kingdom destroyed, and to see with my own eyes what true nobility looks like. You showed me, Octavia. You showed me everything I had forgotten to believe in." Her breath hitched. "But I'm no one now. A name erased. A woman scorned." He stepped closer, taking her hands gently though they trembled. His voice was steady, soft and full of reverence. "No," he whispered. "You are the woman who saved my mother, who taught me compassion, who made me believe in love again. You healed more than her wounds, Octavia. You healed my heart." Her tears spilled freely then. She could barely breathe. Everything felt too large, too unreal. The king before her, the truth unveiled, the way his eyes looked at her not with pity, but devotion. He cupped her face gently. "And I will love to heal yours too." The words broke her completely. All her walls, all her caution, melted away. She saw no crown, no title, only the man who had shared her solitude, who had seen her without judgment, who had listened to her heart when the world silenced her. Slowly, hesitantly, their faces drew near. The fire crackled softly behind them. The air trembled between their breaths, and then, like a prayer whispered to the moon, their lips met. The kiss was soft, trembling, full of everything they had feared to feel. It was not the kiss of a king claiming a woman, nor of a widow seeking comfort. It was a meeting of two broken souls finding home. When they parted, Octavia rested her forehead against his, her voice shaking. "You shouldn't love me. I bring nothing but shame." He smiled faintly, brushing away her tears with his thumb. "Then let the king share that shame with you, for what is a crown if it cannot protect the purest heart in its realm?" She closed her eyes, her tears mingling with laughter, a sound both fragile and free. That night, under the gaze of the moon, two hearts that had wandered through pain and loneliness finally found truth, not in power or revenge, but in love, raw and unguarded. And far away, in the quiet halls of the palace, Queen Mother Beatrix stood by her window, looking out into the same moonlit sky. A knowing smile touched her lips. The moon was high when Alpha King Orion returned to the palace that night. The glow of its silver light followed him like a witness to all that had unfolded in the woods. His mother, Queen Beatrix, awaited him in her chamber, standing by the great window that overlooked the valley. When he entered, she turned, her expression unreadable, her eyes sharp yet glistening with the faintest warmth. "You went to her," she said quietly. Orion didn't deny it. "Yes," he answered. "And everything you said was true." For a moment neither spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken memories. Then Orion's tone hardened, his command returning. We must reopen Lord Cedric's case. Tonight. Beatrix exhaled deeply, relief and guilt mixing within her. I have waited for you to say those words, she murmured. For years that judgment has weighed on my conscience. I signed her exile myself. I thought I was serving justice, but I see now that I was only blinded by Eli's lies. They summoned the royal council before dawn. Scrolls of the old trial were brought out, dusty, sealed, forgotten. Witnesses were recalled, servants, guards, even the former council scribes. All were gathered in the great hall beneath the glowing moonlight pouring through the stained glass. As Beatrix addressed them, her voice carried both authority and remorse. We are here to reopen a case once closed by deceit. The death of Lord Cedric of House Verne. Gasps rippled through the room. The name had become a whispered legend. The story of a nobleman killed by his own wife, the scandal that had stained the kingdom's honor. But tonight, the truth would come to light. Meanwhile, Orion had dispatched a team of elite guards to the edge of the woods, with strict orders. Watch the widow's cottage, day and night. If the Black Wolf appears, capture it alive. Days turned into weeks. The nights were long, the forest eerily silent. The guards saw nothing at first, just the faint shimmer of smoke from Octavia's chimney, the soft flicker of candlelight through her window. But on the third week, under a crescent moon, the stillness broke. The Black Wolf returned. Its growl echoed through the trees, deep and furious. Its eyes glowed crimson as it prowled near Octavia's cottage, claws sinking into the earth. Octavia, who had grown used to this torment, trembled behind her locked door but refused to cry out this time. Hidden among the trees, the king's soldiers waited. Hold your ground, whispered Captain Arlen, the lead guard. Wait for the signal. The wolf circled the cottage, snarling, pacing. Then it threw back its head and howled, a haunting, furious sound that carried through the night. That was the moment the trap was sprung. Nets woven with silver threads shot out from the shadows, glowing faintly under the moonlight. The beast roared, thrashing violently as the nets wrapped around it. Its claws tore at the ground, its fangs bared, but the silver burned against its dark fur. Hold it, shouted Arlen. Do not let go. The air grew heavy with power. The wolf's howls turned into human screams, sharp and anguished. The transformation began, bones snapping, fur retreating, the monstrous shape collapsing into flesh. When the light faded, a man lay bound on the ground. His body was slick with sweat and blood, his eyes blazing with hatred even in defeat. It was Eli. The soldiers stared in stunned silence. Take him to the palace, Arlen ordered grimly. The king will want to see this himself. The morning air was heavy with silence, yet beneath it hummed a storm of anticipation. The people had gathered since dawn, crowding the stone square of the capital. Whispers swept through the crowd like restless leaves. Some spoke in disbelief, others in rage. They had once cheered for Eli, believing him noble, loyal, the hero who had brought justice against the supposed murderer Octavia. Now, that illusion was shattered. Eli was dragged forward in chains, stripped of his finery. His once proud shoulders were bowed, his once arrogant gaze fixed on the ground. Dust clung to his knees as he stumbled, and the people's jeers rose like thunder. Liar! Murderer! You destroyed an innocent woman's life. Each word struck him harder than the guards' spears. The memory of his power, his wealth, his charm, everything, seemed distant now, swallowed by the weight of his sins. Queen Beatrix stood upon the royal balcony, her face pale but resolute. She wore no crown that day, only a simple black cloak, as if mourning the justice she had once denied. Her voice trembled when she spoke to the gathered crowd. I once called this man friend, she began, her words carrying across the square. I once trusted his loyalty and his word, but today we learn that envy can hide beneath a smile, and evil can wear the robe of righteousness. It was I who believed his lies. It was I who condemned an innocent woman to exile. and for that my soul shall bear the scar forever." Her voice broke and tears streaked her cheeks. But today, justice stands, pure beneath the light of the moon. The crowd bowed in silence as the Alpha King, Orion, stepped forward beside his mother. His presence alone stilled the murmurs. Clad in silver armor, his expression unreadable, he spoke only one command: "Bring him forth." The guards obeyed. Eli was forced to kneel before the raised platform. He lifted his head at last, his face bruised, his eyes burning, not with defiance but with a hollow regret. "Your Majesty," he rasped. "I loved her. I loved Octavia, and she chose him. I killed Cedric because he had everything I wanted, her love, her faith, her light. But when I took him from her, she still would not look at me. She chose death over me, even when I offered her power." He gave a bitter, broken laugh. "So tell me, my king, what would you have done if love drove you mad?" The crowd gasped at his boldness, but Orion's eyes remained cold. "I would have chosen honor over obsession," he replied quietly. "But you chose ruin." Eli's lips trembled. His pride cracked open like fragile glass, revealing the frightened man within. "I didn't mean to fall this far," he whispered. "I just wanted her to love me." From behind the guards, Octavia appeared. She had been watching from the shadows hidden under a hood. But when she heard his voice, she stepped forward, silent, graceful, unbroken. Eli looked up and froze. His lips parted in disbelief. "Octavia." Her eyes held no hatred, only sorrow. "You destroyed my life," she said softly. "You took everything from me. But I pity you, because you never understood love. You thought it was something you could take, not something freely given." Her words cut through the air like a blade, and Eli bowed his head. For the first time, tears slipped down his cheeks, not of pride, but of shame. The guards seized him as the drums rolled. The executioner stepped forward, his silver axe gleaming in the pale sunlight. Queen Beatrix turned away, trembling. Orion clenched his fists but did not look away. And Octavia, her eyes glistening, closed them tightly as the final command echoed through the square: "Justice for the innocent, judgment for the guilty." The axe fell. The crowd erupted in chants of "Long live justice" and "Praise the moon." Yet amid the noise, Octavia stood still. A single tear traced her cheek, falling onto the earth that had once cursed her. When the body was taken away, she whispered to the wind, "May your soul find the peace your heart never knew." In the quiet of her cottage, Octavia lit a small candle and watched its flame dance. It was over, the torment, the lies, the exile. Yet she did not smile. Her heart carried the ache of everything lost, and the faint, trembling hope of what might come next. The sun rose softly over the kingdom, gilding the palace towers in gold. Bells rang through the morning air, echoing across the valleys and forests, where whispers of Octavia's name had once been spoken with scorn. But today, that name was no longer cursed. It was sung. In the grand court, the council gathered under the gaze of the Alpha King. The marble floor gleamed, banners of silver and white fluttered, and the scent of wild jasmine filled the hall. It was the day justice would not just be spoken but seen. Queen Beatrix sat beside her son, her heart light for the first time in years. Before them, Octavia stood in a simple gown of pale gray, the same woman once branded as a murderer and outcast, now standing tall, her head unbowed. The silence that filled the court was heavy, reverent. Even the nobles who had once sneered at her could not meet her gaze. Beatrix's voice trembled with emotion as she rose. "Years ago I passed judgment upon this woman," she said, her eyes glistening. "I condemned her to exile based on lies woven by a jealous heart. But the moon, ever faithful, reveals truth in its own time. And today, we stand to right that wrong." She turned toward Octavia and bowed her head, a gesture that sent a gasp through the hall. "Forgive me, my child," the queen whispered. "Forgive a ruler who failed to see the truth." Octavia's lips parted, her eyes wide. Slowly she bent and touched Beatrix's hands. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "the past cannot be undone, but your heart has healed what was broken. I hold no anger, only gratitude." The Alpha King, Orion, rose next. His voice, strong and resonant, filled every corner of the hall. "Let it be known to all," he declared, "that Octavia, of House Varon and widow of Lord Cedric, was falsely accused. The true traitor Eli met the fate his deeds demanded. Her name is clean, her honor restored." A roar of agreement filled the court. The nobles pounded their fists upon the marble, and murmurs of apology rippled through the crowd. But Orion was not done. He turned to Octavia, his gaze tender yet commanding. "Octavia," he said, stepping down from the throne dais until he stood before her, "you have shown mercy when the world showed you none. You have given kindness even to strangers. You healed my mother's wounds, and unknowingly, you healed mine. You are strength clothed in grace." Her breath trembled. "Your Majesty." "Call me Orion," he said gently, "for I do not speak as your king alone." A stunned silence swept through the hall. Orion looked at Octavia, his eyes shining with sincerity. "Octavia, you once said that a king's heart belongs to his kingdom, but a kingdom is only whole when its Luna walks beside him. So I ask, not as a ruler, but as a man, will you stand by my side? Not as a prisoner of fate, but as my queen?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling freely as she covered her mouth in disbelief. The woman who had once been abandoned, mocked, and cast away was now being offered the crown itself, not as pity, but as love. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Then Octavia took his hands and whispered, her voice breaking with emotion, "Yes, Orion, I will stand by you, not as your redemption, but as your heart." A cheer erupted through the court. The wolves in attendance lifted their heads and howled, the sound echoing like a hymn. Beatrix rose, her face radiant with pride. "Then, by the light of the moon and the will of the ancestors," she proclaimed, "let the bond be sealed." Orion turned to Octavia, his eyes glowing faintly with the power of his lineage. He leaned forward and marked her neck gently with the sacred wolf bond, a shimmer of silver light spreading beneath her skin like a moonlit flame. Octavia gasped softly, her heart pounding as warmth flooded through her. The bond connected them, not just as king and queen, but as souls intertwined by destiny. The moon, though it was still day, broke through the clouds above the glass dome of the hall, bathing them in silver light. Gasps filled the chamber. The gods themselves had given their blessing. "The moon hears the cry of the just," Beatrix whispered through tears. "And today, it answers." Octavia stood beside Orion as the people chanted her name. "Luna, Luna, Octavia," their voices rising like music. The same voices that once cursed her now called her queen. As the ceremony ended, Orion leaned close and whispered, "You were never the outcast, my love. You were the heart this kingdom forgot." Octavia smiled, her tears glimmering in the moonlight. "And you," she whispered back, "are the king that made me whole." That night, the palace shone brighter than it ever had before. Wolves howled from every corner of the kingdom, their cries a song of renewal and peace. And far above them all, the moon watched, silent, eternal, proud, its light resting upon the redeemed Luna and the king who dared to love her. For the outcast was no more. The lost heart had been found. And under the silver gaze of destiny, love, pure and unbroken, reigned forever. If you enjoyed Octavia and Orion's story, tell me where you are watching from, your heart-stopping moment and your favorite character. We love to read your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any love story we create under the moonlight. Until the next story, keep howling.